this is the 1-year anniversary of our AIMI Happy Hour. Really excited that you could be here and celebrate with us today. We have some of our regulars on with us today, and we're planning on kind of doing a retrospective, not totally a clip show, because it's going to be some new content in there. We'll cover some. Oh, is it not live? We're planning on kind of doing a retrospective, not totally a clip. Oh, now we're live. Okay, great. So really what we're going to try to do is cover some current trends and current events, but then also sort of have some reminiscing of the last year, and maybe some blooper reels if we can pull some together. And then with all of our super fans, they'll know who we're going to be inviting on as a surprise guest about halfway through the hour, which we hope you'll stick around for that as well. One more thing, speaking of super fans, I wanted to give a shout out to Ben Fine, Sabri Boglu, and Pratik Deb, who will be joining us backstage after the show, and hope we can entertain them sufficiently after we're done. Okay, so just a quick recap. This happy hour program was definitely a pandemic kind of experiment, and really just an excuse to get all of our friends and colleagues together and chat about AI in healthcare, and sort of as an escape from the challenges and sense of isolation that I think we all felt as healthcare workers or just in our lives last year. It was a very difficult time. And the initial goal of all this was to try to recreate some of the wonderful and insightful conversations that we used to have at conferences between presentations, in the dinners and happy hours afterwards, when we just kind of were, casually talk about what we're into. And we really wanted to bring that kind of to the forefront as part of this program. So anyway, we're going to look back and recap some of our favorite moments, and just some stats from last year. We've had 10 episodes, well over 10,000 views on YouTube, and something close to 20,000 hours watched, excuse me, which is to say I can't say it's all been high yield information, but I think it's been fun. And hopefully here and there you've had some pearls and maybe a few laughs. So let's get started. Let's do what we do. We'll dive into some of the most popular questions from last year, some controversies maybe. And since I'm moderating, I will ask some tough stuff, get people put on the spot. And so for those of you joining live, please go ahead and add your comments and questions as well. All right, so let's go around the room with introductions. And this time, after you tell us who you are, please tell us your favorite moment from the happy hours that you've been on this last year. Hugh, you want to kick it off?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. I'm Hugh, an ex-radiologist here in the UK, and I now help consult with regulatory and other things with startups globally. I think I have two sort of standout memories. One is being utterly and bizarrely confused as to why we suddenly did a live cut to a farm to go and look at some chickens at some point. But I think my other favorite episode was where we discussed GPT-3, which was this big language model that came out. I can't remember when, over a year ago now. It seemed super exciting and sexy at the time, and really it's very quickly faded and nothing really has much come of it. So that was my most interesting episode.
All right, Luke, you're up.
Hi, yeah, I'm Luke, radiologist, AI researcher down in Australia, early in the morning again. Yeah, I agree with those statements. They were fun. The farm was bizarre, and yeah. Do people remember last year? I don't really even remember last year. What's going on? I think my highlights would be Sharon calling things spicy, and Joseph having his agree-disagree backgrounds whenever I said anything. Usually disagree. So yeah, those were the tops for me, I reckon.
All right, Akshay, you're up.
All right, I'm Akshay. I'm an assistant professor here at Stanford in the AIMI Center, mostly doing a lot of AI work for medical image reconstruction and analysis. And thinking at some of my favorite moments from previous happy hours, I'd probably have to say I really enjoyed moderating the legal considerations happy hour, mostly because I have no idea about anything in the field. So I just got to ask questions that have been on my mind and had a bunch of experts answering them. So that was really fun. And Luke, I think you stole my second answer, which was Joseph's backgrounds with the yes, no, agree, disagree.
All right, Sharon.
All right, I'm Sharon. I am soon to be an ex-PhD student, meaning I graduated. It's not that dramatic. Thank you. in AI, and I think one of my favorite moments discussions was around the CMS approval, Viz AI one. It was just so spicy, as Luke would approve of, and of course the background changing. You can't you can't beat that. I was laughing the whole time. Yeah, I think I was moderating, but it was just tough to moderate that one. Perfect.
You had your hands full with that. I think everybody on this panel has moderated at one time or another, and it was fun to kind of go back through some of the old episodes and watch. Like, there's moments where you're just like, what is happening? I think with some surprises. I think the backgrounds was one. Obviously, the farm was unforgettable. But then I think that there was just a couple things where, the 8 panelists thing was tough, right, to watch that go down. But it actually, we stuck the landing maybe at the end. But my favorite thing, I think, was after the farm, when it really got into a kind of a tough discussion about Pigeon Net, which really extended for quite a while. And Hugh and Luke, I don't know if you want to rehash any of that, but it was interesting now that you look back, where, I think it was a discussion of, is that true intelligence? And, what does that really mean for some of the things that we reveal about performance of the models that we're talking about? And I thought that was an interesting discussion. One of the first times I've seen any real disagreement, I think, on the show. Would you guys have any memories of that, and where you stand on Pigeon Net at this point?
Did we talk about pigeons? I reckon we should. Like, pigeons are great. I just gave a talk about two or 3 months ago in Australia, where my entire talk was about pigeons. Yeah, I think it's probably the best analogy for AI that we've got at the moment. That people understand that pigeons make mistakes because they don't know anything, but they don't understand that about AI. So I just think of pigeons.
Luke, was this at an AI conference or a pigeon conference?
It was radiology AI seminar. Yeah, so it was essentially, I set it up. It was based around the shortcut learning paper and the underspecification paper. And I just essentially said, look, here's a problem. Here's a little data set. What do you think an AI would do? And then I'd ask, what do you think a pigeon would do here? And, and sort of played out, sort of the pigeon will just think that, like, oh, there's a bright spot on the right side of the image. It's gonna fixate on that instead of the pathology. And yeah, I think it was a good analogy. That talk's online. I'll chuck it in the comments.
We should probably put this in a little bit of context, otherwise we're going to confuse it. There is a famous paper or study. There's a famous study that I can't remember where it came from. Maybe Luke knows offhand, but a group of scientists, or mad professors, whatever you want to call them, got some pigeons to discern cancer on mammograms by pecking away at little cropped images from mammograms, and they got a decent level of accuracy. And then promptly pooped everywhere and then flew off, I imagine. So that's the background. There's a lot of animal similarities or things that people talk about animals. In radiology, the other one is the gorilla, the very famous paper about radiologists missing a gorilla on the lungs. And I similarly, when I talk about these things, I think we could train AI with 100% accuracy to find gorillas or those specific images of gorillas. But then, is that a useful task? Are people going around putting gorillas in people's scans in random places, and do we need to find them? It's kind of the question of, the hammer and the nail. Are we using AI as a hammer just to bang every single nail just because we can?
Yeah, from my perspective, that raises another question that I think came up in episode, I want to say it was episode 3, where we even said, do we even need AI at all? Are there not radiographers? Are there not other, health professionals that don't need 15 years of training that could potentially perform some of the things that we're now asking AI to do, even with triage or, potentially with some of the workflow things that we talk about a lot?
We had this conversation in the UK at a conference recently. Someone put their hand up and said exactly the same thing. They said, look, if all the money that had been put into radiology AI startups globally was put into training more radiologists and more radiographers to do reporting, we wouldn't have the backlogs, we wouldn't have the problems that we've got now. And we got a big round of applause from the audience.
What about the future? Bring it down there.
Difficult to scale for sure. Real quickly, I wanted to give Judy a chance to introduce herself. Judy, hey, thanks for joining as always. Good to see you. And please also tell us one of your favorite moments from the last year, believe it or not, of our happy hour.
I think, I don't know what introductions are needed, but I have to think about it. So I think maybe the best, one of the most interesting ones I did was probably for the careers in AI, and also I think overall maybe I've enjoyed the changing of the structure of the discussions. We started off as a true happy hour. We don't drink anything on the show now, but I think we started off thinking, like just being free flowing, but now I think we've had some form of semi-structure form. So, really every episode has been great, including the most recent one on, pharma and AI, which is something that maybe I would never have thought about or been involved in. And, also with the team, fundamentally, you know that I'm not going to answer the question that you asked me, Matt, but fundamentally with the team, it's been sort of growing to get to know these friends. And, I talk with you and Luke every 2 weeks now, so I don't feel like it's happy hour every bi-weekly. And, to congratulate Sharon on completing her PhD, which also happened in the last year.
Sharon, yes. So speaking of Sharon, your PhD, I think, was described as I was at your dissertation and seeing that basically you've done 3 PhDs worth of work for 1 PhD, which I don't know if the university gets a discount or something happens there, but I'm curious to see from your perspective, you really are kind of in the front lines of some of the things that are going on. What do you, in terms of looking back and then some of the predictions or trends that maybe you thought, what were you surprised by, I suppose I should say, with all the work that you've done in healthcare and then where we are now? Are there trends or things that you expected to see take off in some way that maybe didn't, or things that are, still just not ready for prime time?
Well, I feel like progress isn't linear in any of these fields. So it's always a sudden jump of things. So it's hard to say like, hey, this was trendy. And then, because like when something's trending, something already big already happened to make that like growth be a little bit more predictable, I feel like. But then the unpredictable stuff, I think, is the most exciting. And like figuring out, what those might look like or who's pushing on what. And I think, in a sense, GPT-3 was really, really exciting, but it also made it clear that, we're not quite, we need another inflection point for that to mean something for actual applications. It is interesting, though, that the AI community, there are definitely people who are very heavily in the AI community who don't know much about applications, saying things like, oh, GPT-3 will replace like lawyers and doctors and all these other fields. And I'm like, slow down, slow down. I think tells me it can only replace, I think the joke is marketers, because it can say things somewhat intelligently, but they don't actually mean, they're not actually correct. So yeah, someone's like, that's just marketing. So I don't know if that's true, but yeah. That's it.
You've just triggered someone's word bingo by saying inflection.
I'm sorry.
No, but I really agree with what
sorry.
Sharon said. I think a lot of times what is trendy from a technical perspective is really decoupled from what sort of impact it can have. And GPT-3 was a prime example. And even, last year, everyone was excited about it. 6 months ago, at least in vision, transformers were the next greatest thing. And now it's seemingly being replaced by like simple multi-layer perceptrons. So I think till we show that something really has a benefit in a real world application, I think it's really hard to quantify what trends are real and what trends are not.
Yeah, I think that there's a difference though, right? The technology seems to plateau in terms of excitement, but for radiologists who are now catching up with the skills, to be able to start testing, right? Things are getting easier to ask the problems that you want. You're starting to empower data scientists who are clinicians. Then the field is just starting to get exciting, because now you're like, oh, yeah, that doesn't make sense. For example, where I remember we had a session on COVID, right? Like, looking back on the hype of COVID, there are many, many models built 1 year later, few validated. And if you try and take anything out, I mean, I had one of my students do this. I mean, it's terrible. And so, so some of the fundamental things haven't changed, but when you think about like a big, wow, like Transformer or GPT, 3, for us radiologists, we're just getting started and starting to feel confident that, oh, there's a role for us, and exploring and actually having quite a lot of fun, but I'm biased with the people I work with.
So where are we on the hype curve then? Because I think we're kind of almost right at the bottom, and we're just going to go up through that plateau of productivity to find the things that do work. And I can't quite place this exactly. Where does everyone else think we are?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I think that we're starting to see real world applications that work, which, we've lacked for the last 7 or 8 years. Talking about inflection points, a big thing for me this year was the Medicare reimbursement for an AI system. That I didn't expect that this year or in the last year. And I think as you start getting large scale, money being shifted around like that, it really means that you have crossed a plateau. And yeah, I think we definitely had a cool off period that, we're all expecting a lot of startups to fail and so on. Still, I mean, it's happened a little bit, but maybe not as much as I expected again. But I think we're starting to see startups producing quite mature products now. And those products are starting to be useful, so people are potentially willing to start paying for them. And yeah, we're coming up the tail end of that hype curve, I reckon.
One of the things that, surprised me, I think, is that, a lot of what I'm seeing in terms of the churn in academics, and we can talk a little bit about Google Health sort of announcement yesterday, because, I'd like to get all of your reactions before I poison them with mine. But I think that what we're seeing is like we can develop these things. It's great. We can show they work in silico. We can open data and show the flaws in data and et cetera. But no one. It's unbelievable to me that I look around the industry and see other verticals saying, what do you mean you guys aren't going to plan on retraining and continuously updating your models? Like how are you planning on deploying these things? Don't you know that they drift and there's technical debt? Like these papers were written 30, 40 years ago. And why are we just now talking about it? And all the startups that I've seen, and even some of the large players, seem to just kind of they just, barged right in and started talking about deployment without even a small consideration there, right? It's baffling to me. And I don't know whether that's regulatory, whether that's just trying to be first and then figure it out later, that kind of mentality. But what do you all think about this? Because I know Andrew just released a new course on MLOps, and that's the new thing that we're all kind of talking about more and often, but it's not new, right? This is old. These are old ideas that are fundamentally related to the technologies that we're using. I don't understand why we haven't built infrastructure to deal with this.
Matt, you've been on sabbatical for too long.
From the regulatory point of view, this is all kind of the post-market surveillance part, which I think is something that a lot of startups probably weren't prepared for. And over here, next week we're transitioning to the new European regulations, which have a really big burden of post-market surveillance. And I think there's 2 reasons why people haven't really focused on it too much. One, they weren't prepared for it. And 2, I don't think the IT infrastructure is really there in hospitals to have this sort of good quality of data reporting. So these startups now have to build these MLOps solutions, and they have to do deals with the hospitals to not only deploy their software, but to actually extract operational data of how their software is working. Let's say you have something that's finding cancer on images. Are you going to be linking it to pathology later down the line to confirm you were correct or not? Because technically that's what you should be doing. And that's a very difficult thing to do and deploy. So I think those are the 2 reasons.
I think Matt, every time my Angel room doesn't start, they reboot it, and I see Windows. I think it's Windows XP. I'm pretty sure you're very familiar with this, and so the technology and infrastructure is not there. Yeah, I mean, people will say this is why the healthcare needs to move to the cloud, right? And the cloud is not ready. It's not just moving things to the cloud. You have to build for the cloud, and so what I see though is a big shift in the companies that were saying, "Wow, I'm only distributing AI products," right? They're saying you need a critical mass of users, right? This is the democratization of mobile phones in, like a place like in Kenya, where you need a lot of people using your platform. Then you can go back and say, "Oh, I have this algorithm that I want to send to you." So I see that being a big shift in terms of like some of the early people when we're trying to look for platforms to test. But the healthcare system, I don't know who is going to incentivize them to put the infrastructure down for, like when you think or when you read a book or watch a talk on, like ML at Netflix or something like that. All these millions of people watching and trying and marking where you are and even trying to have you interact with the movie. This is crazy to think about in healthcare, I mean, we can hardly provide remote workstations that work for just 100 radiologists. So, the reality of the infrastructure is very, 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 very old. And traditionally, healthcare systems, healthcare IT providers made money by locking you in, making it impossible for you to move. And so to tell them to go back and have a new architecture is crazy. So what I'm seeing though is an EMR vendor, aka Epic. I mean, it's not a publicly traded company, so no one owns any shares here. But where they're saying that they have over 30 models that they are deploying to institutions. But this is, I think for me, this is quite a worrisome trend because they don't have any FDA-approved model. Epic is already a black box as an EMR, and now you add deployment of models that people love and are starting to use without having transparency. That I see as a big threat and maybe an emerging outcome that I wouldn't have predicted. I would have thought that other people will come in and, incorporate like imaging workflow, but not the EMR saying, hey, I can use your X-ray data to tell you who's gonna go to the ICU or not. And that's a little crazy, and the lines get very blurred there. And so I see that as a big threat. The second part that I see is we kind of have to also take the bird's eye view for what's happening in radiology and medicine. Anything that's not very academic is being purchased by venture capitalists. And those are the people, the VCs who are still funding the startups now will own the practices. And so I do see, I know we talked about this in the past, and I may have offended some of the panelists, but I still think this is one of the biggest threats to radiology, this commoditization of radiology. And I anticipate that we will see quite, where you don't really have much of a choice. If I own the company and you work for me and I've bought a VC, I've invested in an AI company, I'm going to bring the system to use. And so I think we're going to see quite some downstream effects. Maybe not in the next 1 year, but this is happening quite a lot right now.
I think to answer your, oh, sorry, Luke, I'll go there. To answer your question about why vendors probably haven't thought about things like distribution shifts over time and drifts of models, I almost think that it's because it's not incentivized to do so, because the current FDA guidelines don't allow companies to update a model. And even if I as a company or a vendor want to do that, I have to go through a second round of an FDA approval process. And given that a lot of players in the space are startups, they probably don't have the luxury to think about like a 3, 4, 5-year vision. They have to survive by next year. They have to put out a product. So I think it's not just something that we can fault the vendors for, but I think the current kind of legal aspect that exists doesn't really incentivize that. So I think both things have to change over time.
Funny, I was going to say the exact same thing, but with a totally different spin on it. That, like,
let's hear it.
Blame the developers. It's like, for sure, like the regulation is a big barrier here, but for a good reason. That we're distribution shifts and retraining models and stuff, we have no experience with it in medicine. We have no experience of whether it's safe. We have no experience on how to do it safely. And just sort of saying like, oh, if the developers were allowed free reign, they do it. I mean, we were talking about distribution shift 5-6 years ago. You know, I've been to lots of conferences and things, and sorry, baby in the background. But yeah, like, sure, we could do it, but the idea of having a system that has never been tested by regulators because it's changed over time is incredibly different than the usual way we regulate devices and drugs. And I think the fact that the regulators have been slow here is a positive, not a negative.
I think this is a good point to sort of, as we reflect, to bring in our guests, our surprise guests.
It's not chickens, is it?
Hi, John.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Who do you got for us today?
Oh, well, we are heading on over to visit our horse and some of our cows, if that sounds good to everybody.
Fantastic.
So, I don't know if all of you are familiar with us, but yeah, my name is John. I'm an animal caregiver here at Sweet Farm. And so we are a nonprofit organization in Half Moon Bay, California. And so we are a farm animal sanctuary and a produce farm. And so with our farm animal sanctuary, we rescue animals from the farming system in other situations like laboratories or petting zoos, or we take in strays. So basically anybody who has been in a position of abuse or neglect, or just otherwise needing a home where they could recoup, rehabilitate, and find a place of peace. And so we are going to get started with Sturgis and Gizmo. And so Sturgis is our horse, and Gizmo is our Hereford steer. And so you can see Gizmo there is just is grooming Sturgis. They are such good buddies. Gizmo loves to groom Sturgis. Sturgis is not always keen on it. As you can see that Gizmo was being very nice and grooming his hip there, but Sturgis just walked away. But they are together through much of the day. So they're not together, all the time, of course, but they are together oftentimes grazing or napping, or again, we'll find Gizmo grooming Sturgis. And so this is something wonderful for us to highlight in our tours, because as you can see, we do have other cows with us. So Gizmo could just really spend his time with the other cows, but the one who he really chooses to spend his time with is Sturgis, and vice versa. Sturgis also with Gizmo. They will, seek each other out in the pasture. And so it shows that these animals do forge true friendships, because again, if their lives were really so mechanical that you would think, well, cows will just hang out with cows. That's not true. They hang out with those who they really like. So it's just like us. We have the friends that we do because there's something appealing about them. And so it's the very same thing with the animals. And so along the same lines, we'll just take a quick stop over to see Paco to build on this theme. So Paco is one of our llamas. And so Paco was raised on a horse farm. And so he's well familiar with horses. He's comfortable around them. Unfortunately, where he lived, the horses that were there, they all aged and passed. And then this horse ranch had to close down. So Paco was needing a place to live. So that's how he ended up here. And so because Paco is familiar with horses and is comfortable around them, he has really connected with Sturgis. So Sturgis has his two good close companions, Gizmo and Paco. And so we have two other llamas here. So again, if it was really just a matter of, animals of a particular species hanging out together, then Paco would have just automatically joined the other llamas. But no, he's got a mind for horses, and that's who he likes to socialize with. So, but the thing with Paco and Sturgis is Sturgis doesn't really seek out Paco's company, unfortunately. Paco hovers over Sturgis kind of like a helicopter mom, always making sure that he is okay and doing well. And then Sturgis will get really annoyed by it and sort of leave in a huff. And then Paco will follow him to make sure that he is in fact okay. And so it's kind of comedic, but you can really see sort of the distinctions between the two within this relationship. You know, how Paco is fixated with Sturgis and how Sturgis gets annoyed with him. And so again, you can see, like, you know, the degrees of their dynamics, you know, sort of unfolding in this sort of description. Again, you know, they do seek out companionship. They do care for each other, if they do in fact care for the other one. So again, just like us, and they do have emotional reactions to them. So Sturgis will have his emotional reaction to being around Gizmo, because, you know, he enjoys being around Gizmo, so they relax together. But if Gizmo is grooming him too much, then Sturgis will get a little annoyed by it. And then again, at the same time, Paco becomes fixated with Sturgis and wants to be around him all the time, but Sturgis gets annoyed by it. So, so the emotional and interpersonal dynamics are really truly there. So if you think that these animals have these kinds of you know, perceptions of each other and these sorts of emotional capacities, then if we think about the situations that they are put in as individuals within a farming system, for example, then we can imagine the degree of suffering that they may actually endure. And so, case in point, we have Angel here. So Angel is a Black Angus. And so Anguses are bred for meat production. And so she was used on a farm for basically giving birth to calves who would then end up being meat calves, or perhaps more cows who would give birth to more calves. And so she once, so her first offspring was stillborn. And cows are very emotional animals. They care deeply about their calves. And so when a cow has a stillborn calf, or their calf is taken away, for example, as happens all the time in the dairy industry, they will bellow in grief. They are very vocal about the sadness over the loss of their calves. And so they will even, you know, again, if a calf is taken away from them, they will look around for their calf. They will make this concerted effort to try and find the calf that is now gone. And even more than that, I'd read an article about a cow who was on a farm of some kind. I don't know what the purpose of the farm was, whether it was meat or dairy, but in any case, they had access to pasture, and she hid her calf from the farmers to keep her calf protected. And so, you know, that means a number of things. I mean, again, it demonstrates the love that she has for her calf. So there's that interpersonal relationship and that emotional connection from the mother to either the son or the daughter. But she also understood the worldly situation that she was in. You know, she knew that danger was, you know, was going to happen to her calf. And so she devised a plan to hide her calf from the farmers, knowing exactly who was going to be basically engaging that danger. So for anybody who thinks that cows don't have, you know, sophisticated cognitive abilities, you know, it's stories like these that convey that they really do. So poor Angel, she had her first stillborn. And then so they tried it again, and she had a second stillborn. And so what that meant for her on this farm was that she was just going to be slaughtered. But fortunately, somebody who lived nearby heard Angel, and she inquired about Angel, and she made an arrangement with the farmer to acquire Angel to save her from being slaughtered. And then that's how Angel came here. So we're happy that she can now live here in peace, unfortunately without her calves. But still, she knows that she can live here with her companions and have no expectations of her other than just for her to enjoy herself on a beautiful sunny day. So if anybody has any questions as we come up on the end of our tour, we hope you will take the time to ask.
Thank you, John. Any questions from our group? I just really quickly,
Yeah. How do you get such good internet connection out there?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was the question?
How do you get such good internet connection out there in this
Oh.
branch? Crazy.
It's quite amazing, isn't it? Yeah, we must have little antennas set up in strategic places so that, yeah, no matter where we are on the property, we can always conduct a tour.
This is fantastic. Thank you, John, for dropping in and introducing us to some new friends. And yeah, I'm glad the Angel's story had a happy ending. And thank you for sharing with us. Any other questions from our group?
All right, great. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So we really appreciate the time that people are spending with coming in for these virtual tours. You can find out more about us at sweetfarm.org. If any of you are in the San Francisco Bay Area, we do have in-person tours now, which allows you to meet the animals in person and to interact with them. If you're not in the San Francisco Bay Area, we hope this would inspire you to look to see if there are any farm animal sanctuaries in your area where you can learn about their residents. We are, again, very grateful for your interest and your attention. We hope you're all staying safe and healthy. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Okay.
you might see us. A live edition of our meeting will be out at Sweet Farm. So we just gave us a great idea.
Oh, great! That would be awesome. All right, thanks so much.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, bye.
Even though it wasn't a surprise, it still felt like a surprise. Still, I don't know what to say. Any immediate reactions to some of any metaphors jump to mind from any of the stories? I'm willing to entertain anything.
Man, I've been watching Handmaid's Tale, and I was like, "Oh no, the cow!" But definitely, that horse definitely was an adversarial cow example. I think standing both next to a cow and having spots like a cow.
Have scientists gone too far?
Maybe it's natural. I don't know.
For the rest of the show, any discussion of classification we have, we're going to have to frame it as horse versus cow.
All right. Well, with that, let's move on just quickly with some of the time we have remaining, because I did want to look ahead a bit, talk about some current events and look ahead. So just because it was recent, I thought I would kind of go around, as I alluded to earlier, and get folks' reaction to some of the big tech health announcements this week, or last couple of weeks. One of them being, of course, Google's announcement of a phone app, or I guess a web-based app for dermatology images and search, and I guess in some cases diagnostic suggestions, and also some work in TB on chest X-rays. And then I think some of the news about Microsoft acquiring Nuance, another kind of large healthcare announcement. And I wanted to get folks' thoughts. Anything off the bat? Anybody have any burning reactions to those things?
There's on the Google thing, so they've obviously released this new web-based tool they call Derm Assist, I think. And the point I want to make is a regulatory one is they're saying, oh, it's been CE marked, and saying this means they've got regulatory clearance. But actually, what they've done is they've self-certified it as a very low-risk class 1 device, and they've sort of used quite vague language about whether it doesn't give a diagnosis. It gives you sort of potential matching lesions to the ones that you might have. And it seems a little vague, and the potential for the layperson to misunderstand and use this as a diagnostic device, I think, is quite high. So yeah, for me, that's the interesting angle. There's also other people on Twitter saying that, is the data set really robust enough? Apparently there was no Fitzpatrick skin tones of grade 6 in there, and then very few of the other end of the spectrum. So basically, if you're very dark skinned or ginger, then you can't really use it very well.
Oh geez, that's bad.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else got any thoughts on the data, if they've had a look at it.
I know it'll lead to overdiagnosis. It sounds like it's going to be like a glorified WebMD search, or help lead you to like the right, essentially WebMD result, which obviously like tells everyone they have cancer. So like if it's that kind of search, I don't know.
That's the question, right? Like, can you have a WebMD search that provides direct information about an individual patient, that, or is a person just going to misuse it? Like, I kind of feel like this is really skirting, like Hugh said, gray issue. This is really skirting the boundaries to say like, oh, we're just providing information, but that information is specific to that lesion. And, you know, it's only going to take one person cutting out their own mole because this app said it was a melanoma to, you know, absolutely put paid to this claim that it is a class 1 device. Like this, you know, people are going to see this as diagnostic. It's, you know, the equivalent of saying you've got a full self-driving car, but, you know, and it's totally activated. You can, it's in the car, go buy the car. Oh, by the way, fine print, you're not allowed to use it. Like, you know, people are going to use it. That's the thing. I'm just really skeptical that people are going to contain themselves and not use it, even doctors, let alone patients.
I really worry about the adversarial robustness for models like this too, because the same picture, you know, you take it from a different angle, you take it in different lighting conditions. I still can't take a good photo on my cell phone when I'm trying to do that. So I do worry about how robust a system like this and how it could just create unnecessary headaches and challenges for the patients who are using it, maybe under the right or wrong use cases.
It really does raise the question of, you know, how far do you go to, you know, point of care or consumer driven, you know, diagnostic devices? I mean, there's, you know, in med school, you know, it's common that med students, as they go through their rotations, will self-diagnose with diseases over and over again, right? Because they're, you know, I mean, presumably intelligent people are reading lists of symptoms and drawing conclusions, right? That out of many possibilities, but not having, I guess, some of the diagnostic and, you know, experience, right, to put them in perspective. And, you know, I can only imagine being told that, you know, as we already do, that there's, you know, there's so much misinformation that's sort of curated on a daily basis in the web, as we've seen with GPT-3 and other sort of large scale apps. I just, you know, I guess I just worry about it. But my other reaction was maybe rephrasing the question. If you're a $1 trillion company and you want to do things in healthcare, is this what you would do? Let's put the question that way. Or, and if not, what would you do? And now I know maybe we can go around to think about that, because I feel like maybe they need some guidance. I see a lot of really odd decisions, and I guess I'm puzzled as to what can really affect healthcare, what can really help healthcare, and what makes good marketing.
If I was Google, I would go through, I'm sure they have the data. What are people Googling about their health? What are the top 3 searched things globally? And then focus on those. I don't know if skin lesions is in the top 3, but presumably they have this kind of data to work off.
I think it is up there. It's like 10 billion searches. But I don't know. It's also like, what can Google competently do as well? Because they definitely, even though they can throw money at something, they sometimes can't competently do those things that they throw money at. So this does feel close to their, you know, image search and reverse image search kind of capabilities. It just feels like close to where their core competencies are. I think where their core competencies fail are anything requiring any human in the loop. So they would want a fully automated solution. Hopefully they have like a giant banner in the results. I haven't used it yet, that says like, this is not a medical diagnosis, and also like, please don't trust this. I know that doesn't always help, but I think sometimes it does. But yeah. But
what's the point of, you know, using it? So here's some information, but don't trust it. Like, no one's gained anything. You've just confused somebody, essentially, haven't you?
And I kind of think this is a reasonable business decision, that, you know, essentially this is the image equivalent of a 23andMe, right? Where you put out a product that may not be able to do very much yet, but, you know, you're gathering data while you're using it, right? So they've released a product that, essentially technically is indistinguishable from a class 2 or class 3 device and is only differentiated by its intended use. That the intended use is saying, don't use this for diagnosis. But all they have to do to change it to a class 2 device is say, use this for diagnosis. And, I assume that the reason they've made this decision is that with the data sets that they could access, the device wasn't ready to be tested at class 2, or they are currently testing it at class 2, and this was just as a sort of temporary measure. I'm not sure which way they're going.
Or they wanted to sneak in before the regulations change next week.
Yeah, presumably they started a fair while ago, but yeah, I mean, to get in before the MDR comes in is definitely making things easier, isn't it?
As of next week, even if their intended use is, this is not diagnosis, this would still be a class 2 device, because the highest risk foreseeable misuse is that a layperson could mistake it for diagnosis. And clearly, that's our first reaction when everyone saw this, right? So it's automatically class 2.
From a future product perspective, though, I think what Sharon mentioned really rings true to me too, about knowing your core competencies. And I think, for example, Apple comes to mind here. They have a great experience with building sensors and then building algorithms that interact with these sensors. So something like the new Apple Watches that can detect AFib. I think that's a perfect match because you can, sell the hardware, you get people locked into your ecosystem, and then you can start analyzing the data as it comes in. So just knowing what you're good at, from that perspective, this makes sense for Google. They're really good at search. They're really good at context finding. But I guess there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in the end users.
I think that, one of the things we haven't talked about, well, I mean, we talk about it in generalities, but, there's this concept in systems engineering that devices aren't just technical systems, they're socio-technical systems. They engage with the users, they engage with the people in the network. And, we've had this trend in general in medical AI that we just treat these systems in isolation. We don't do clinical testing, we don't see how people interact with them. And in this case, you're making what really seems like a fairly intentionally obtuse decision that the patient is not going to misuse it, or the user's not going to misuse it. And, it's almost, I mean, I don't want to, get sued here, but it seems almost a bit willfully misleading to me that, we've already seen with self-driving cars, you say, you can only use this if you pay attention. People stop paying attention and they die. Is it better that, you told them not to in the first place, or is it better to stop them actually dying? And, I think as doctors, we do no harm, so we prefer the not dying side of things.
I think most of us would choose the not dying option. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, but to all of your point, I mean, this is something that we've touched on many different occasions for different reasons, which is that you perturb one part of a system, which is a relatively closed system with healthcare, and all the things that go into, and then you sort of don't have any way to control the after effects or the the effects on the rest of the system. And that, to me, beyond some of the things we mentioned around deployment and other regulatory and legal aspects, is really what I think is the piece that needs to get solved. Even if we believe these technologies are useful, powerful, and will accomplish some of the things that they claim to be able to accomplish. And so I think that to back to Judy's point again, it requires that level of, I guess, we need to reduce the information asymmetry, I think, between the healthcare system and these technologies, so that there is a understanding on both ends. And I think with this direct to consumer approach, I guess I don't know whether that will ever be closed in the way that it should be. And to self-driving cars, yeah, we see folks that are sitting in their back seats, running around town in their Teslas, right? I mean that. Because I guess there's that information asymmetry maybe of not knowing where all the fail points are in the technology under the hood, and then possibly a disregard for others, but certainly themselves in certain cases. So, all right, well, with the time we have remaining, I guess we can look forward a little bit more and say, what sorts of topics do you think we should really try to hit on this year? We have a whole year ahead of us. We've been having a lot of fun. We probably won't be able to do Sweet Farm every day, if that's your suggestion, Akshay. But what kinds of things should we be doing this year to branch out? I think I'll start just by saying I'd love to explore some non-imaging based technologies. Especially, I really was fascinated by the legal and the pharma episodes in particular, and I really enjoyed sort of thinking about these things from a completely different perspective. So maybe we can think of more opportunities to bring guests on that have diverse expertise outside of sort of our core group here.
The two areas that I've been working on recently are the intellectual property around these things. Can you patent an algorithm? How do you protect yourself? There are 20 companies out there doing the same thing in chest X-ray, for instance, all claiming to be patented, and clearly that can't be the case. And so that's an interesting space. And then the second one is health economics, and that was probably the biggest news of this year with obviously the CMS approvals in America. And it's really interesting to work on budget impact models and things like this, and multi-criteria analysis to figure out what should you be paying for these, assuming that it actually does work. And I find this kind of area fascinating. And I think anybody who's involved in AI, especially from the purchaser side, will want to know the answer to those questions.
We kind of knew you'd vote for the regulatory. We had you down for that. Don't worry, we got you.
So you're invited. I'm getting many more reasons. I definitely think the economics is really, really interesting, and understanding that more. I'm also broadly interested in different modalities in addition to imaging, like Matt. But that could mean on the technical side, like speech or audio-based things, or I know like olfactory things have been slowly ramping up a little bit, and just like different modalities like that. Like, are there different ways that we can tackle multimodal inputs and make them useful? That includes text, of course, but like multimodal models and multimodality have become like pretty big topics this past year in the AI community. So just wondering how we could leverage all that, because we as humans like are multimodally sensing different things.
Yeah, for me, I think there's two things that I'm quite looking forward to. I think on one end, the field of machine learning just moves so quickly. So being able to discuss what are some of the latest and greatest advances, what are some of the pros and cons, I feel like that maybe caters to my technical biases. So I think that could make for a fun conversation. And we could literally ask the same questions every 6 months, and then the answers will change because of how much velocity there is in some of the ML advances. So I think that's one. Second, I think it's great, similar to what Matt mentioned, in trying to build bridges. So how can we connect to other related industries that really play together in the healthcare space? So ML and like pharma makes sense. ML and legal communities will make sense in a deployment basis. And I think this has come up quite a few times in our conversations, that we can build technologies, but they're not necessarily in tune with the end user, or they're not in tune with how it will be implemented. So I think the more we can bring these like different silos together and have those conversations and really understand what are the problems on the other side, I think that will just make for better products for patients going forward.
I think one other thing that, we've talked about a lot interspersed in shows, but we've never done a full show on AI ethics. And, certainly over the last year, there's been a lot to talk about. And so it has come up a fair bit. But I think having a targeted panel of AI ethics experts would be a fantastic thing for the show to do.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And we've gotten some great suggestions in the chat, which we will also grab, I think, and use. We have a lot of folks coming to the AIMI Symposium again this year, so please save the date. August 3rd and 4th, it'll be our second. Last year, I think we had close to 5,000 people live and some great talks. And we really did try to make that an opportunity to branch out across ethics, regulatory, different aspects of healthcare, from product all the way to consumer facing and everything in between. And I hope that we can continue to do that again through the next year and do a deeper dive, as everyone's pointed out. So, well, we're at the top of the hour. I just can't thank you enough. This has just been so fun. I appreciate each and every one of you on the call for taking the ride and agreeing to do this. Obviously, Hugh for staying up late, Luke for waking up early, and apologies to both of your families for the pain of having to listen to this conversation every month or so. Sharon, congrats again on your PhD, and Akshay, I will see you around the farm. Judy, I was really delighted that you could join us, and I know we'll talk soon. So please join us again. Next month, we're gonna have an entirely new cast for the first episode of the year. And the topic is TBD. So we hope to see you. We hope to see you then. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. And panelists will stay on for our post backstage event that's about to kick off. Thank you.